Day.
Hello, everybody. Nice to be with you. Happy Sunday morning, whatever year this is. Let's start with a song. When my hands were emptied, when my hope was gone, I couldn't help but wonder, what had I done wrong? But even though my heart was broken, there was no need to despair, 'cause a vessel must be open to put something better there. Oh yeah. Into my empty hands, gently you pour new life for me. Yours is a perfect plan. The ups and the downs were meant to be. Now I understand you needed my empty hands. So forgive me when I doubt it. I admit sometimes I do. Or consider giving up 'cause I cannot see the truth. I know I'll never go without it. Your deep and abiding love, oh love, into my empty hands, gently you pour new life for me. Yours is a perfect plan. The ups and the downs were meant to be. Now I understand you needed my empty hands. Yours is a perfect plan. The ups and the downs were meant to be. And I cannot help but cry to think of the gifts you've given me. Now I understand you needed my empty hands. So thank you for my thank you for my empty hands. In November of 2019, we moved into the house I'm in right now. Thanks. We moved into the house I'm in right now, which let's just say that if if we had deeper pockets, we probably would have called a teardown instead of a fixer-upper. We didn't quite know the extent of the fixering-uppering that it was needing. So we came in to a house on a beautiful piece of land on a hill here in Orange County. And every single surface in every single room needed to be replaced. And I'm not actually exaggerating. Every floor, every wall, every ceiling, every socket, power outlet. It was just a mess. Not to mention the fact that on the slope of the hill, the call her a lovely lady who sold us the house, had, as far as we could tell, had never been down the hill. Like she'd lived here 35 years, and as far as we could tell, 10 or 20 years had gone by without her walking down the hill because she had never done anything with it. There was nothing there except there were weeds that were so big that we thought they were trees. 6 foot high wild grass and trees that weren't. That was kind of it. No stairs, no sprinklers, no the fence fallen down. Just a mess. Okay, so we go in, and my wife said what felt like a profound thing, and it guided our decision to step into this project of a house, which was what if we were in our 20s, right? So I'm now 51, she's 49. What if we were in our 20s? How would we feel about taking a risk like this? Because it was a risk. It was a risk in the sense of it being such a fixer-upper and being right at the top of anything we could even reasonably, just afford at all, right? Or get approved for a mortgage. And but she said, but if we were in our 20s, we would just dive in, get it done, and it would be the kind of decision that years later we'd be so glad that we'd made. Whereas in our 40s, we might be more risk averse, more hesitant. And so what if we made the decision like we were in our 20s? And so we did, and it still shows all the potential for being that good a decision. But we went in with a list of things we were going to do. Quick things, like early things, like paint over the spectacularly unattractive hand-painted and textured cabinets that this crafting lady had done terrible, terrible violence to in the kitchen. We were just gonna paint them white, right? We figured, well, that'll be a good, quick first step. How hard could it be, and so on. So we come in with this, like, the basics list, right? We'll just slap paint on that wall and paint on that wall and so on. And but we learned something kind of quickly within the first day, the day that she drove away. The day that she drove away after telling us that the house is fine in the rain and always has been, it started raining. And in the morning, we woke up to a flooded quarter of the house. So instead of what we were going to do the first few days, we found somebody who could drain and dry the house and fix the drainage so that it wouldn't happen every time it rained, right? And then maybe a month later, when we felt like we were getting back to our plan, there was heavy rain again, and we heard a cracking sound from a little hallway, tiny little hallway bathroom that we weren't even we were too scared to go into, frankly, because it still had the original 51-year-old toilet, and it was just trouble all around. So we figured we'll get to that bathroom someday, and in the meantime, bar the door. So we heard a cracking sound from inside that bathroom and opened it up in time, literally, to watch the ceiling fall, soaked with the rain that was happening outside, soaked with termite poop, rat poop, old insulation, rotting wood, and down it came right in front of us into that bathroom. And we looked at each other and were like, okay, our to-do list has just changed. Apparently we're getting a new roof. And that became the thing, right? And so we've now been in this house almost exactly 2 years. It was Thanksgiving in 2019. And we have found that no matter what we decide is next, the house knows better. The house tells us what's next, and it makes no secret about it. It is an unmistakable cracking sound followed by cascading termite poop, and you can't miss that sign when it's time to do something to the house, right? And so I thought, you know, I don't give talks in any kind of conventional sense as much as I just share things I'm observing, learning, thinking, and feeling along the way, in the hopes that they're, if maybe a little entertaining, you're welcome to laugh at our hardship, because it isn't really hardship; it's just hard work and a disgusting mess frequently, and or that it provokes a thought, or even if I dare to dream, that it gives you, in the case of today's thought, that it gives you a little bit of comfort and peace of mind about something that you might be struggling with. So in the spirit of the house tells you what's next. I don't know about you, but I can feel pretty impatient with most goals. If I have gained a ton of weight, especially since our boy was born, and it's entirely his fault. So if I decide I'm going to lose, 20 pounds, which would be a good start, um, I conveniently forget that it took 10 years to gain the 20 pounds. So I decide that I'm in a hurry to lose them, and proceed to step on the scale every day or two, in order mostly just to torture myself with feelings of inadequacy and failure. I guess I can't think of another motivation, because if you gain weight over 10 years, why would you think you would lose weight in a hurry? Or certainly, why would you think you'd lose weight and keep it off in a hurry? Um, but I started thinking about long-term plans versus impatience, about being in a hurry for something that's going to tell you when it's ready. And those things are everywhere in our lives. In fact, Janice, you were just talking. I didn't expect you to walk right into this sort of subject when you talk about, we'll get back together when we do, right? Looking for tech people to produce a program, looking for people who want to gather back up in the room together. I've hosted a lot of events, um, and I know when it isn't time, because I try and no one comes, or I announce it and there's no interest. And it's a very small scale example of what I imagine McDonald's does when it's working on a new burger. They go into their laboratory, and I'm sure it is an actual laboratory and nothing resembling a kitchen, and they make, half a dozen different flavors of burger, and then they gather people together and give them a taste of it. Um, and in the simplest sense, if they want to buy it again, they liked it. And you find out, I've had many good ideas, I've had many brilliant ideas for businesses and events and books and workshops and songs, and it turns out they weren't so brilliant. And how did I find out? Because I tried them. The song tells me if it's any good at the end of it. The event concept tells me if it was actually a winner, because nobody signs up. That sort of thing. In the large scale, in the world, we see this kind of impatience, trying to force things to happen, to end, to begin. We find things, trying to force things to work. And it just always seems like, looking back, and it's almost never clear until afterwards, that it was happening in a perfect sequence, that it was telling you when it was over. It was telling you when it was ready to begin. There are brilliant ideas that Tesla, the scientist Tesla, is a famous example of he had multiple ideas that weren't ready. And it's in a way, it's his own misfortune. I think actually Vincent van Gogh was painting. He wasn't just painting when he was painting, right? He was mentally ill, um, despondent, and broke. And he was expressing himself and his view of the world by putting paint on a brush and putting that brush on canvas. He thought he was just painting. And famously, in his own lifetime, not a single person paid money for one of his paintings. Now his paintings sell for 30, 50, 75, 100, 150, 200 million dollars. But more importantly, even than the dollar figures, are the fact that while he thought he was just painting, what he was actually doing was writing a guidebook for an entire new, not just a generation, an entire new course of artwork, of art, of expressing with paint on canvas. He was doing something that was going to happen in its own time, and it's a terrible, terrible, almost a tragic misfortune that the timeline of the revolution that he was writing with his brush was longer than his lifetime. But there was no controlling that timeline. Einstein had a year. Some of you may be familiar. He had a year that's in retrospect has been called a miracle year, annus mirabilis. Right, 1905. Einstein was working in a crappy job at the patent office in Switzerland. He had a view of the clock tower of the city square, and he could obviously, we can imagine, do this job in his sleep, but was unknown to the academic establishment and had ideas. So he sat there reviewing people's patent applications and had a few ideas that in his spare time he wrote into 4 academic papers from an unknown second class was his category, was his status in the patent office. Unknown second class patent clerk wrote 4 academic papers in 1 year that overturned Isaac Newton's understanding of the universe, which had been the only understanding of the universe that had prevailed for centuries, and proposed ideas that simply boggled the imagination of the other finest minds in science in the world. He published these 4 papers, and they actually slipped under the radar. Not that radar existed yet, but they slipped under the radar for a while, and it required him to essentially be discovered by a couple of sharp-eyed geniuses who came across these papers and thought, who the hell is this guy? And what is he saying? And they went to talk to him, and they summoned him to have a conversation and realized that he had made significant advances and significant discoveries. But one of the more interesting, I mean, many interesting things that he did in this 1 year in 1905 was he proposed that the nature of gravity is that, and I'm not going to say it correctly. In fact, Einstein himself said that if somebody claims they can explain relativity to you, they're lying. He said, I don't know if there are 4 or 5 people in the world who can explain it correctly. So if anybody tells you they understand it, they're lying to you. So he proposed that what we experience as gravity is actually the mass of an object warping what he called space-time. Right, that was a revolution just in its own. Time had always been considered a steady, constant, tick, 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 unchanging. He proposed that space and time were bound together, and that mass, a lot of it, could warp space-time like a bowling ball on a mattress. If you put a bowling ball on a mattress, then you can imagine if you're rolling, little ball bearings or golf balls across a mattress and there's a bowling ball on it, those golf balls will appear to fall towards the bowling ball because the bowling ball has made an impression, an indentation in the mattress. And that's what the sun does in our solar system, that we are all sort of falling into an indentation created in space-time by the sun, right? This is what your average Joe thinks of when he looks at a clock tower and sits and processes patent applications. But on the subject of patience, it was a theory. There's different kinds of science, and one of them is to come up with a theory that blows everybody's mind, which this did. But then there is the testability. It's science isn't about proving, it's about disproving. Science is inherently a skeptical, cynical process of finding the next level of true and disproving what's been assumed before. So a couple of scientists fanned out in 1919. I believe it was 1919. Let me check my note. Yes, 1919. A couple of scientists fanned out. This is 14 years later. One of them went to the Horn of Africa, and what was he going to do? He was going to be present for a total eclipse of the sun. And his goal was to take essentially a before and after picture of stars that are behind the sun. Because, according to Einstein, light bent under the force of gravity. So therefore, during an eclipse, you should be able to observe a star in the sky that isn't actually where it looks like it is, but the light has been bent by the sun as it passes it. Right? A tiny, tiny amount. But just enough to confirm that gravity affected light, affected space, affected time, that gravity was just a part of a system. It was not a standalone force, but it was a part of a system that he had defined in 1905. And 14 years after he wrote those papers, the scientists, a man named Eddington in particular, came home with 2 photographic plates and proved that the star moved, at least its appearance of it. The light of that star moved. Just a tiny amount, but more or less exactly how much Einstein predicted it would under the force of gravity. And the next day, the headline in newspapers around the world, if you can imagine a world where scientific discoveries were front page news around the world, Einstein became the most famous scientist since Isaac Newton, and was regarded as an unparalleled genius for the rest of his life, which he most certainly was. 14 years to be proven right. There are discoveries right now about black holes that are being made that are confirming things that Stephen Hawking said decades ago. He's been dead now for several years. He never lived to see confirmation of several of his theories, as many scientists don't, right? So could you wait 14 years to be proven right? What if you understood, like a scientist does, like some scientists do, I imagine. What if you understood that there was no rushing the process of proving you right or wrong? I grew up, as many of you probably did, listening to what became your favorite albums, right? Think of your favorite album. Every time you turn on the radio or go into a grocery store, you hear, at least my radio stations I listen to, I hear Hotel California, you hear Isn't She Lovely? There's songs that just never go away. Don't Stop Thinking About Tomorrow, Fleetwood Mac and so on. And these are, and I sit here in this little room and other rooms in the past, and I try to make music, and then I turn on the radio and I listen and I hear Hotel California. And it's overwhelming. It's intimidating, and I think, my God, there's like not a note out of place. These things are just perfect. They knew exactly where to put the second verse and how long to make it and when to fade it out, and that guitar solo, it's just perfect. It builds, and you can't wait for it, and you can hum along with everything, and it's just right. It's miraculous. It's spectacular. Well, only gradually over the years have I learned why some of the most beautiful pop music that I know by heart, and that you probably know by heart, is so perfect. And that's because it took a long time to make. Stevie Wonder was already a celebrity and known as a genius himself, and he was given, I believe the amount was $14 million advance to go make his next record. He'd already made a couple of classic albums as an adult, and of course several as a kid, right? He disappeared into the studio. He played a lot of the instruments himself, but he also brought in guest singers and guest instrumentalists and so on. It was here up in L.A., I believe, for the duration, and he was in the studio for nearly 2 years. The money he had gotten was from Motown, uh, Berry Gordy, and Berry Gordy was not allowed to hear anything he was working on. And for almost 2 years, Stevie Wonder worked uh, on a collection of songs that was so substantial that it didn't become an album. It became a double album, and the double album itself didn't have enough space for all the music he'd made. So he included an extra. I don't know if you've ever seen the original print of this, but it became an extra little 45. Four extra songs on a 45 inserted into the sleeve with the double album. That was Songs in the Key of Life, which came out with dun 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 dun, right? And it came out with Isn't She Lovely? And um, it's an unmistakable work of musical genius that Berry Gordy waited 2 years to see to hear anything from it. But when I listened to Songs in the Key of Life, like I did growing up, I thought, my God, I mean, it's just how do you even compare, much less compete? I mean, what do you do? And the answer was, of course it took, of course it took 2 years. That's 2 years, by the way. Like when I say Hotel California also took over a year and a half in the studio to record. Now, a year and a half, if you can imagine, uh, when you're at a certain echelon in the music business, and especially if you have major label money behind you, uh, you do what's called a lockout of the studio, which means you give them a certain amount of money per day, or per week, or per month, and nobody else gets in the room. So you own the place for a while. Now, a lockout can easily cost a couple $1,000s a day, easily, especially at a good studio. So we're talking about I don't know, $500,000 probably just to own the studio for over a year and a half. Then factor in the world's finest microphones, the world's finest speakers, the world's finest guitars, the world's most brilliant producers, mixing engineers, the best interns, I guarantee. Uh, they had a cocaine budget. I heard a guy talk about on a panel once to keep the band going. I mean, honest to God, there was a gasp in the room when he said that the major label provided a cocaine budget, right? But we're talking about a year and a half to 2 years with everything the finest money can buy, everything the best. And then they make the perfect album. That's what went into it. Now, when I think about my albums, I don't take 2 years. Sometimes I take 2 months and I feel indulgent and I'm ignoring my wife and boy and I'm, spending too much money on a new instrument or I feel like I need it done by a certain date or a certain gig. And then at the end, I feel dissatisfied about the quality of the outcome. Well, it's an unfair comparison. Mine was just me and I'm not kind of the best at any of those things. And I have, my budget's a few $1,000s, let's say, compared to a couple of $1,000,000. I don't have any of the help, and I didn't take that time. Taking that time is the difference between ironing out the last four regrets in a song or a painting, I imagine, or a speech you're writing or a book. It can make the difference between having the regret in print or noticing it and removing it. Hamilton, if you've seen the musical Hamilton, Hamilton took Lin-Manuel Miranda 7 years to write. And I wouldn't be surprised, I don't know for sure, I wouldn't be surprised if he wrote a first draft and thought it was pretty decent in 6 months. That would be my guess. But then, the more he looked, the more he listened, the more he read, the more he heard run-throughs, He had idea after idea after idea, and it just takes time. I am myself writing a musical right now, and I'm having a glimpse into the spectacular complexity of the project and how I'm having what seem to be great ideas in my sleep that I got to sit up and write down and then figure out how to incorporate. It takes time. Um, another random example of it takes time is seemingly random, but my brain works in free associations for better and much worse. But I grew up using computers, and I was always a big fan of Apples. I used the first Apple computers. I used the first IBM PCs. I was a kid, but it was fun. It was cool. And I remember when Windows came out, that I thought it was just crap because it was essentially stolen from the Macintosh. It was a ripoff of Macintosh that didn't work nearly as well. But that's how I felt about it, and I still feel that way actually. And I was watching Windows take over the world, if you can remember these times when everybody was buying a computer, every business was putting a PC on the desk, and every computer ran Windows. You couldn't bring Apple, Mac into Office, generally speaking. And it felt like this terrible injustice as billions and billions and billions of dollars poured into Microsoft and into the pockets of the founder of Microsoft's Bill Gates, who started the company in 1975 and had a couple of the luckiest breaks anybody could ever have, plus spectacular genius, plus timing, plus and so on. But he was piling up all this money while Apple really struggled. Before, in the late 1990s, it was a good time to buy Apple stock. In fact, it was such a good time to buy Apple stock that Microsoft bought Apple stock, invested millions of dollars into Apple, ostensibly to save Apple, because that's how close Apple was to going away. And it just felt like an injustice. Well, here's what I didn't know. I and many other Mac fanatics all over the years didn't realize is that while Bill and Melinda, his wife, were taking these billions of dollars and by all appearances putting them in their pocket, hoarding this ridiculous pile of money. What he actually was doing was acting as humanity's savings account for crises, for medical emergencies, for cures, for vaccines, for malaria nets. He was actually stockpiling money to save lives with it. He might not have even known that. We certainly didn't know that watching. Where now, in 2006, he stepped away from being the head of Microsoft, started his foundation with over $30 billion of his own money, him and his wife's own money, gathered several other billionaires, notably Warren Buffett, contributed tens of billions of dollars as well, and is now, he and his wife, ex-wife, I believe, actually, they may be divorced by now, but they're separated if not divorced. But he and his wife became the single greatest philanthropists in the history of the world. They themselves, with all that Microsoft money, have saved millions of lives with the money that was being stockpiled with all those PCs on all those desks. Who knew? Who knew that something was working in its own time for good, and that you could stand by and rage against it, or try to stop it, try to block it, call it bad. But in fact, something else was happening, whether you call it above or beneath the surface, that we didn't, not only did we not know, but we didn't need to know. Now, those are large-scale examples when I listen to, like I say, when I listen to great music and discover that it took time to make, or when I look at great acts of philanthropy like the Gates Foundation and think, yeah, that was working behind the scenes all along. Now, when I reel it back in and take a look at my own life, whether it is, like Janice was talking about, whether it is when do we get back together as a church, or whether it is our son, who's almost 10, Jude, when will he feel like himself again? Right? Because he has not felt like himself. I mean, most of us haven't. But as mommy and daddy, it's been especially painful to watch him struggle, loneliness, anger, sadness, real isolation, only child. We had a dog who died last summer that really broke his heart, um, and we could try. It's going to sound silly, but that's my whole point. We could try to force him to feel better, right? We could make the dramatic grand gesture. Let's go to Hawaii for a week, or I don't know, not that we could afford that, but you know what I'm saying. Like, well, let's actually Hawaii probably doesn't want us at this point, we could, or let's get him a fancy toy, or I don't know what, right? But the truth is that healing takes time, and it's happening right now. Today, it's happening. He actually had a sleepover with his uncle and his little cousins last night. Only the second or third time ever, right? That heals him. Not totally, not dramatically, maybe not even noticeably. He'll come back with a smile. He's going to be exhausted. God only knows what time he went to bed last night. But, but in other words, if you if you have been hurt, and you have, if you have been lonely, and you have, if I have been disappointed, and I have, if I am trying to craft a masterpiece, and I am, if you are trying to find something, a friend, a partner, a career, a passion, trying to find forgiveness, trying to find healing from a chronic pain, trying to find a cure for a disease, right? Trying to find peace of mind in an unbelievably rancorous and bizarre moment in America, as you are, as I am. It's actually, I'm not a woo woo person, but my observation, small and large, about this sort of thing, like the examples I've given and many, many more I could give, my observation is it's happening without worry. It's happening without laying up all night worrying about it, wondering if it's happening. And I'm not saying some mystical, like, the husband is on his way. I'm saying because whatever we crave, whether in my case chocolate, or or a or a spouse, or a fortune, or a best-selling book, whatever it is, generally speaking, it seems to me we're not really craving the thing. We're craving the feeling that the thing represents. That feeling is available and is coming. It just seems to never come on our timetable. It seems to come on its own timetable. That is not, to me, a despairing thought. That's not a sad thought. It's not a disempowering thought. It's the opposite. It means that today, if I'm lonely, I can do a little thing to take care of myself. Just a little thing. Not waiting for the grand gesture from the stranger, not waiting for the friend who never calls to call. Just assume that I'm on a 5-year plan for something, right? I started my writing this musical. Okay, I started writing it a month or two ago, but that's actually not true because I literally sat down at my desk a week ago and thought, wait a second, I feel like I wrote something about this before, and I searched in my little backup hard drive and found that I had written some of the scenes that I'm now contemplating for my musical, I'm not making this up, in December of 2008. Okay, so if I wrote it in 1 month and finished it, is it a 3-month-old musical, or is it a 13-year-old idea that's been, you know, maturing and developing and evolving in my mind? We are long-term projects. Our feelings, we don't gain 20 pounds overnight. We don't lose 20 pounds overnight. We don't become lonely overnight. We don't heal from loss overnight. Taking it just today, doing just today what you and I can do, is in fact all we need to do. And that's what I came to say today. Let me sing you a song. I'm through asking where I'm going. I've been asking all my life. I've grown tired of all this wondering when everything seems to turn out right. So when my mind needs something to do, wants to know the future, I whisper this: I'm okay. I've always been, and I'll always be that way. You want to sing that line with me? I'm okay. I'm okay. I've always been. I've always been, and I'll always be that way. And I'll always be that way. So here goes nothing. I'm taking a chance. I'm opening up, knowing that I'm in good hands. And here goes everything. It's all on the line. Oh, but I'm not afraid this time. Some say it's crazy. Some say naive to close my eyes and take the leap. But I know better, 'cause I believe even in the dark my soul can see. So when my mind plays its usual games, oh, my answer is always the same. Yeah. Here goes nothing. I'm taking a chance. I'm opening up and knowing that I'm in good hands. And here goes everything. It's all on the line. Oh, but I'm not afraid this time. Here goes nothing. I'm taking a chance. I'm opening up and knowing that I'm in good hands. And here goes everything. It's all on the line. Oh, but I'm not afraid this time. No, I'm not afraid this time, 'cause I'm okay. I've always been, and I'll always be that way. I'm okay. I've always been, and I'll always be that way. There you go. Thanks for having me today. I appreciate it.